Neighbors again. Drew Griffin is somebody who's also contributed to a magazine I write pretty regularly for, relevantmagazine.com. You can check out his article over there, which I thought I would have him hop on for, which is Do We Love Amendments More Than People? Talking obviously about the gun control debate and the events of a little over a week ago now in Vegas. So, well, first of all, man, kind of what's your story? You're a pastor in New York. Like, how did you land there? Like, yeah. What do you do in the world?
Yeah, sure. Well, my family's originally from New York City, and several years ago, we began to process a call when we were at seminary, at Southern Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky, to plant a church here in New York City. So we moved up here about 4.5 years ago and kind of began the work to plant Cross Church, New York City, which is on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, in a neighborhood called Yorkville. So that's where we moved and what we've been doing.
Okay. I have never been to New York for long enough to do anything. Okay. I've been there for work. I've flown in, ridden in a taxi, maybe ridden the subway, gone to a thing and left. So okay. I have no, I don't know. I still don't have any frame of reference for like the enjoyable part, I guess.
Well, if I find it, I'll let you know. No.
Okay.
No, you experienced what I think a lot of tourists experience, and it can be really exhausting. You know,
yeah.
Sort of in and out and taxis, and there are neighborhoods and areas of the city where the pace of life is slightly slower, not a lot slower, but slightly slower, and life happens, and it's a pretty delightful place to live if you like urban living. So, yeah,
I just don't know, like. Everybody talks about like how New York has this, vibe that's like nowhere else. Right. I just didn't, and I'm not saying it doesn't. I didn't see it ever. I haven't been there for that stuff.
Sure.
Does that make any sense? Like,
no, that makes sense.
It'd be like if I went to Chicago. I was in a car accident, pretty bad car accident in 2013. I had to get a lawyer due to some insurance stuff. So, for that occasion, I hopped a train to downtown Chicago. I lived in the suburbs at the time. I think I went maybe to Chipotle because I was hungry, and then I went to the lawyer's office, and then I went back out. So, given that, I would have no idea what Chicago was exactly, other than just a really big place. That's kind of what that's just what I've experienced.
Well, I think there are two experiences of New York. One is kind of the magical tourist experience, like Michael Scott. You come here and you eat Sbarro, that good Italian place, Times Square. And then, you see places that you've seen in movies, and so you can kind of capture maybe that kind of magical feel. But then the other level is just the aggregation of small little neighborhoods in the city, where really all throughout the city is just a bunch of collection of really small towns in these neighborhoods. And as you live here, you get to know everybody, and you walk around and wave hi to people like, Mayberry RFD or something. You just kind of, you get to see people, and you kind of get to know them in the neighborhood. And so it takes on a whole different level and a whole different kind of magic.
Okay.
You get to know the city at that level. So
yeah.
Come up and visit, and I'll take you around.
Okay. So getting into the article, if I can just be direct, like, what do you, which I'll try to link to it in the show notes, but you're not really calling for any particular thing.
Right. So
what do you want?
Okay. Yeah, I think there are two things that I'm trying to kind of accomplish with the article. I mean, I'm limited somewhat by the fact that anytime you write an article for a magazine, or that you've got a word limit, you got 1,000 words or something, something like that. So you and you have editors, and so there are multiple layers you have to work through to kind of get a brief message across, succinctly. So you can't put everything in the article. And
I will say I probably, I write for Relevant just about every week. I would say I probably lose 2 to 3 sentences out of every article, and I'm always surprised. And I'm not complaining. You're always surprised, like, and your article never winds up being quite exactly kind of what you thought people were going to read. Right. And that's not just Relevant. That's all magazines.
Right.
And just at the pace of which thing happens, there's usually no debrief of like, well, here's where we trimmed these 2 things or whatever. It's just, you're just kind of on to the next thing. And that's the writing life.
Right. So there are, given those constraints, there are 2 things really in the brief amount of time that I had that I wanted to address. And the first one really is kind of challenging this absolutist view that a lot of kind of Second Amendment advocates have. And I come from the South. I was born and raised in Arkansas. I'm familiar with gun culture. I get it. You know, I understand the value of the Second Amendment. I understand kind of constitutional theory. But there's this strain, and it's even really present among evangelicals, that is this, that, you know, you just cannot restrict any rights, that the Constitution is just sacrosanct. You kind of can't touch it. And I want to push back a little bit on that, to just kind of, if you look at kind of social contract theory and the way that our government and our country is kind of constructed, that there are a lot of areas where we kind of give and take, and a lot of areas where Christians even advocate rights probably should be restricted for the betterment of life and the betterment of the country. So I want to push back on that. And then the second is just to begin to tease out and touch the comfort level that evangelicals and Christians have with guns and kind of gun culture. And I think guns are kind of a neutral thing. They're a tool. They're a tool for hunting. They're a tool for protection. I get it. But when an event like Las Vegas happens, and you have the bump stocks that are used to modify semi-automatic weapons, and they turn semi-automatics into basically automatic weapons that allow for 90 rounds a minute or something like that. For people then to go and look and say, "Oh, I've got to start buying those bump stocks before they're made illegal," speaks to something, right? There's something going on there that's kind of deeper, of where you find your comfort. Do you find your comfort in God and your security in God, or do you find your comfort in the fact that I can get as many guns as I possibly can and I want to? And really just trying to question, as Christians, should we be a people that are really closely associated with something that's just really an instrument of killing, even if it's for protection, an instrument of killing. So pushing back on both of those kind of tendencies. I don't know if that made sense. But.
Yeah. Okay. Well, no, let's kind of jump into each one of those. So as a gun owner, I would say that I am, I actually hadn't gotten around to leaving the NRA, and I'll probably, eventually give money to another organization that's maybe a little more, not like them, but something in that same vein. My real schism started with them with the Philander Castile, not pushing back on that case, just because I could totally see, as somebody who carries, I could totally see myself in that situation.
Right.
Because, I live just outside of Chicago, and when Illinois, I live in Wisconsin now, which means I can carry in the vehicle in the state of Illinois, but I can't carry out of the vehicle.
Yeah.
So if I have the gun on me and both feet in the car, I'm a law-abiding citizen. If I put one foot on the ground, I'm a felon. Okay. The chief of police for the city of Chicago said when the law went through, well, our officers are probably going to wind up killing people over this. He said, I can't make any promises. So I could see myself getting shot in that situation. The bump stock thing to me, two things that I could very, very easily say, should not be around. The bump stock thing, which if you're not familiar with the whole gun culture thing, it really allows you to fire like 9 rounds a minute by letting the gun bounce around to change it from a semi-auto to a functional fully auto. The other thing that I would say I find to be very concerning is a 50 caliber round, because it can be used against commercial aircraft, and I find that to be, even though it hasn't happened yet, I would say that's something that we're really, really playing with fire there. That goes well beyond any kind of reasonable self-defense, that you could hit a commercial airliner with a round that could conceivably bring it down. I find that to be very scary.
Or armor-piercing bullets that could, either pierce body armor or pierce a car. I mean, there are.
Okay, I don't know if I believe that. Okay, this is where I'm going to be like, all right, New York dude. Okay, do you know what armor-piercing bullets are?
You go ahead.
Okay, well, it's a full metal jacket. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, it's kind of like people talk about the gun show loophole. I bought my last gun at a gun show.
Right.
I stayed there for 2+ hours, just basically listening to an audiobook on my phone, because I had to clear the FBI background check, like everybody does. So I sat there until the FBI called the guy back. Yeah. I don't. Okay, so like the media is talking about like automatic rounds now. There cannot be an automatic round. There is either there's what a round goes into, right? So, I mean, if I have to get shot by something, when they're talking about armor piercing rounds or whatever, an armor piercing round does not expand. If that's what they're talking about, a full metal jacket, which is a target round, it doesn't expand. So it really makes, like, if to go back to archery, right? Like, if you and I are squaring off between England and France in the battlefield, it's not the piercing of the arrow that is so bad, because like you get pierced with a needle, right? And that doesn't kill you. It's the path that tears. Yeah. That causes a lethal wound or causes you to no longer do battle, possibly die, right? The quote unquote like armor piercing thing, if I have to get shot with something, if you're like, there's something that's going to go through your side right now, like I'm going to pick armor piercing because it's going to be a smaller trajectory that's going to tear through my intestines.
Right.
And I like, you know, I mean, I can Google it right now, but I've never seen such a thing, you know, growing up hunting, you know, and somebody who does carry for self-defense. I just am not sure what non-gun people are talking about here.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's, I mean, there's a lot of nomenclature, and I think there's a little bit probably of a lost in translation with people who are overly familiar with guns and the paraphernalia and those that aren't. I've been to my fair share of gun shows, and I think that there's, you know, a difference between like a hollow point round and like you said, just a solid full metal jacket. And there's, I think, mainly pushing back on the existence or the necessity of either larger rounds, like you said, that could reach airplanes, or just things that go beyond the basic need for self-defense, you know, that seem to be excessive, and even, or go beyond the hunting necessity, right? You want to go hunting, that's great. You know, I don't think I want to eat whatever meat, you know, you unloaded your, you know, 90 rounds into, if you're hunting with, you know, an automatic weapon. So it's, it seems to be excessive, I guess.
Well, yeah. So in almost every state, you can carry 3 to 5 rounds while big game hunting. So even if it's like, and that's where you know, I haven't purchased any kind of like tactical rifle just because I haven't really had the need or want for one.
Right.
But I will say, if I ever were to buy one, in a, you know, I have mixed feelings, but if I were to buy one, it would be for hunting, because technology evolves, and compared to other stuff, they're lighter, more customizable, and just, I mean, it's just sort of like buying a new car that's got more Bluetooth stuff in it, right? I totally, that's where I would say I am, and I'm not even upset, often confused when I try to talk to people who are, you know, kind of in the more gun control camp, because like they, you know, they talk about like the Clinton gun ban, or the, you know, the Clinton gun ban stuff in the 90s. That actually banned things that went on guns. It didn't ban any guns.
Right.
And, you know, so I can understand like the magazine thing, right? Beyond that, I'm not sure how, like, so, you know, like Colorado has a 15 round limit in all mags right now. Okay. So I mean, that's one argument. Beyond that, I can't understand. I'm genuinely perplexed. I'm not arguing back. I don't understand why like putting a bipod on something makes it an assault rifle if it's my, you know, and that's kind of where they went. So I have a bolt action rifle that I put a bipod on for a long shot if I'm up north in Wisconsin for deer, you know, where I can conceivably hit something at 300 plus yards.
Right.
Well, all of a sudden that's an assault rifle at that point, like under the Clinton gun ban stuff, right? You know, mounting things that could be mounted on something. So like if I could put a flashlight on something, which would, you know, could be used for both self-defense and for hunting if you're, you know, clearing out coons or something like that. If you're a farmer and losing, you know, a couple tons of feed a year. So, you know, but that's not what I'm not exactly sure like what anybody's calling for, because like they talk about like closing the gun show loophole, which I don't know what that is. You know, if you want a universal registry, then say you want a universal registry. Don't say you want to close the gun show loophole.
Right. I think it is a way. A registry is one of the trigger words, especially for the NRA. I mean, they're firmly against it. So I think it's. You have a lot of liberal politicians out there that are dancing around what they want, but they're just too scared to actually say it, because it's a nuclear word that just blows up, and sends countless donations to their political opponents. So there is, in the current political environment where free exchange of ideas can be very difficult and very costly, I think you have a lot of kind of hedging your bets and a lot of euphemisms and ways of trying to get around of, like, this is what they're maybe really after. So what I am trying to argue for, really just trying to raise the debate and kind of push and question, because there are a number of ways that it can play out. And I think, honestly, going state by state is great. I mean, I think that's the way the Constitution is devised, why we have federalism, that, we push these two states for individual states. Obviously, like in New York, especially in the city where I live, I'm quite happy if there are pretty strict gun laws, and a lot of people around here don't have guns. I mean, if you ever walked around here, it's like there's some days that I'm glad I don't have a gun, because, it's just, it can be kind of a frustrating place to live. But you live out in Colorado, and you're 50 miles from the nearest town or the nearest sheriff, and you've got animals and you've got people, and you've got to, worry about your own safety. I mean, you're going to have different gun laws, and I think that's going to be a wise decision for a state to do that. What I'm really trying to kind of raise the question is that I think that, especially after Newtown, and I think that was when this idea really kind of came into my head, is like, we've got to try, I think, and do something. And I think that it is part of the beauty of America is that we're a pluralistic society that's kind of built on some compromises and kind of built on some give and take. And in transience on both sides is, a group saying we're going to take all guns and melt them down. Not good. I mean, that's never going to happen, first of all, but I mean, it's not good. Another side that says we're never going to, do anything or submit to anything that could, look like a restriction or a registration or a limitation on our inviolable constitutional right. That is also probably not the best and the most ideal. And so trying to kind of push the two sides together, and it's obvious crazy people are always going to do crazy things. There are always going to be guns out there. The bell has been rung. You can't unring it. But if there is any way that, you can either limit the magazines and restrict the magazines or the bump stocks or anything that could potentially, retard or limit a person's ability of even one of these tragedies, right? Even just one of them, if it saves 50 lives, I think it's worth having a discussion about. And I am not that afraid of, discussing and negotiating the extent to which I can enjoy my rights as a gun owner. I'm not afraid to discuss it.
So I'm going to shift it to actually post 9/11, because this is probably where we, probably respectfully differ. And this is where you have to dance a little bit of a line, right? Because I would say, hang on, let me reset.
Yeah.
There's going category by category, right? Number one cause of gun deaths is suicide. After that, the vast majority are urban, violence over drugs, money, whatever. And normally done with the number one gun used in those crimes is actually former police revolvers that were traded in and then sold on the private market and filtered their way down because they're a couple $100. So theoretically, if we just made every handgun $500, that might actually go further than rifles are used in 3.5% of crimes, like any kind of rifle, right? Crime of passion, where some guy out in Colorado, takes out his wife's secret lover from 100 yards from the tree line,
right.
That all the way up to what we saw in Vegas. Where I would be willing to go here is, I would say, first of all, that like the Patriot Act, still to me, I would rather live in a country where I am slightly more likely to die than to have complete mass surveillance. Like everybody, Verizon handing over everything,
Yeah.
tens of millions, if not over 100 million cell phone records.
Right.
I'm not okay with that. I would rather have a slightly elevated risk terrorism. That being said, there are people that ought to be watched. And the judicial system is, I think Rand Paul really is onto something. We need to have a 24/7 judicial system, not no warrants, but instead judges who are on call on second and third shift, so that when a warrant is needed, we're still going by due process. I don't like anything in the hands of one branch of government. My family's been here a long time, fought in the American Revolution. Part of my extended family are refugees from Laos who had to flee communism. I don't like power in the hands of any one person, or any one group. So what I would say is that if we're not going to have mass total surveillance on, on the terrorism side of things, that does mean that, some moderate additionally looking at the records of Muslims going in and out of the country is appropriate. It's either that or we take the records of 100 plus million people, and no branch should have total power there. They should have to go through a judge. Okay. Same thing with this guy in Vegas, that, if you buy 33 tactical rifles in the course of like 7 months, that should cause somebody to, give you pause. Right. But I guess where I come down, like, I try to be somebody that lives by a standard or a code or whatever you want to say. So if it's not okay to, I should let you talk in a minute, but okay. If Bill Clinton's affairs were wrong, Donald Trump's affairs were wrong, JFK's affairs were wrong. Like, you got to pick. You can't be thrilled that Trump is leveraging executive power like crazy and upset that Obama did the same thing. You're either for a smaller government or you're for an expanded use of executive powers. Right. So I'm someone, I think, who would say that if we have to be on a scale here, I slide more towards compiling data and profiling people who could be high risk, as opposed to, a chopping off of all rights, or chopping off of a chunk of rights, and mass surveillance. I would say both of those things at the same time. I mean, as far as, how do we prevent something like this? I mean, you can ban all rifles, so that they at least have to get up close with a handgun. I mean, certainly the bump stocks thing is, to me, like an open and shut case. There's no practical self-defense reason to have that. There's no practical sportsmanship reason to have that, because there's no sporting in just laying down lead. Like, there's no sport there, right? I have friends that are, they're cops and actually are federal, agents as well. And I've had the opportunity to fire fully automatic weapons, and I've never found it to be that interesting, because I'm not working on a skill. If I'm going to go shoot, I want to shoot to get better for fun. So that, I mean, that's where I would land. Like, I think that, I don't know if we're going to wind up with, some sort of, quote unquote assault rifle ban, but if it's what we had in the 90s, it doesn't ban any gun. It just sort of bans what the gun looks like. And Columbine still happened in that way. Right. I mean, so what's your take on that?
No, I think that I think that we're not far off in terms of finding a middle ground kind of to meet, in that I do think that there should be a greater level of discernment on the part of law enforcement, and there should be some laws, some sort of registration or some sort of mechanism that, if you've got a guy who gets background checks and follows the legal process, but does it 30 times for assault rifles, and it doesn't own a gun store. I mean, he's just a guy someone should at least maybe raise a question, go interview him and just say, hey, how are you doing? I mean, there should be something that is triggered when kind of abnormal behavior, because we do the same thing, with pharmaceuticals. If you go and you're buying cases of Sudafed or something, people are going to say, what's going on? Why are you doing that? And because there's obviously a potential public health risk if they're trying to create meth or something like that. So I think that and I made this kind of analogy in the article, is that I think there are a number of areas in our culture where we've drawn the line of, where could the potential out there, where this could be headed, and where we see there's an increased potential for harm, either to individuals, to themselves, or harm to other people or groups. We find that it's wiser and better to build a fence at the top of the hill than a hospital at the bottom, right? And so both are, potential solutions. But obviously, if you can create some sort of mechanism and some sort of guardrails at the top, you're probably going to have less need for the hospital in the end. And so I think that we're close there. The problem is that there's a certain segment of our population that is so kind of enamored with gun culture that they would even view some sort of mechanism that's monitoring those, a grouping or a cluster of sales or purchases as being some sort of registry. And it's that kind of absolutism that I'm trying to press against.
Well, and I believe probably it's highly illegal. I believe that probably every gun I've ever bought is in some sort of federal registry somewhere. I think they do it anyway. I do. I'm not okay with it, but that's kind of what I live with. So okay. And this is where I love getting into lines where you can't stay on party lines as much then. So are you okay on the same thing with hate groups and ideologies as well? Because if not, that does seem inconsistent.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that there is a line somewhere to be drawn between a physical action and a line of conscience and the freedom of conscience and what somebody is actually thinking, right? That there is you can have a group of people that are getting together and having a discussion and ideas. Now, if they translate it into violence, I think there should be mechanisms that, or if they have a proclivity to continually translate that into violence, that I don't know if I have a problem with necessarily kind of monitoring that. But I think where we get into the real gray areas with just this catch-all word of hate groups, it's kind of like, what does that mean? Because to the left, I'm a part of a hate group, as an evangelical Christian, and have associations with groups that they would probably think are hate groups. But we're not, there's nothing that I've ever done and nothing that any of these groups have ever done that would be causing physical harm towards individuals, and the actions that come out of our discussions, if it's releasing a statement or an op-ed or something, is hardly lethal. So there's some.
Oh, no, I'm not talking about freedom of speech stuff. I'm talking about people who are traveling back and forth in and out of the country. This guy sent a bunch of money to the Philippines before he did what he did. I don't know that it was ISIS. We do know this. I mean, this would be circumstantial evidence, not direct proof. But ISIS is very, very prevalent in the Philippines right now, unfortunately. I believe they've taken over one of the entire islands. That mixed with buying, 30 plus assault rifles does seem like if there's some sort of data, some sort of algorithm, I buy Facebook ads, right. Big data is pretty smart. I don't think you can flag somebody because of, the religious clothing they wear or attending religious services or something like that. But there does start to be a case to be made that those are two pretty big activities to be able to ignore.
Right. What you find is, even though I think big data is outpacing even our ability to kind of process it at this point. And I think and we saw this 17 years ago during 9/11, is that it's not that we necessarily didn't know some of what was going on, but getting the various institutions and branches and departments and bureaus to kind of connect all of those dots, given the data that they have, was what was difficult. And then when you now look at the massive amount of data that's having to be processed now, whether it's on surveillance or tracking people or purchases, sorting through that and then making sure that if the SEC is following some exchange of money or transfer of money from here to another part of the country, another part of the world, and the FBI is noting this guy's buying a bunch of weapons. Trying to get all of that linked in together can oftentimes be difficult.
Okay. So what do you I pretty much laid out where I would be at. I would say if it was really proven that a lower magazine, like a lower capacity to magazines, would reduce, a death count in a situation like this, I would be okay with it. Right. The problem is that, if something's neutral, I tend to leave it alone. So the problem is that, like, in the Batman shooting in Colorado, more people would have died if he would have been using a standard mag instead of this 100-round drum because it jammed up, right? And he did pick the only theater in the area that had a gun ban, so that nobody could fight back against him, right? At the speed of which, I can flip out a mag in a handgun, or, pretty much anything at the range, I don't see a lot of, if your goal is to mow down a crowd of people, I don't see a lot of difference. You're talking about 1 to 2 seconds. And I don't know if anybody's ever done frame by frame camera studies here on, like, how many people would have gotten away if somebody would have had to change a mag sooner. But I also compare and contrast that with, 50 plus people in Vegas, compared to, nice France, where a guy just drove a truck in. A guy from ISIS just drove a truck in, and that was 86. So if something is proven beyond a shadow of a doubt to reduce the loss of life, that's where I would go with you of, like, we've got a lot of people more than amendments. However, I just, like, it's not that I don't agree with you in theory, it's that I don't see the evidence on that. And then getting into, like, more of a strict gun ban, if you look at, because everybody wants to compare us in England, right? If you compare urban centers to urban centers, so places with 250,000 plus people living in them is where violent crime usually tends to happen. We're pretty on the nose as far as being similar. The difference being that they have a lot more home invasions and like actually like trying to like rob people right as hostages. And that's where I would say being pro-life means I have an aesthetic of, I would want people to be able to defend their innocent children.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think I'm not pacifist. I mean, it's not as if I would argue for or against self-defense. I think there are a couple things. I think one that in terms of seconds, when the biggest shooter is firing 9 rounds a second, seconds probably do matter. That's 9 potential lives. So there is, I think, some argument there that can kind of push back. And I think that the standard of just that you set is pretty high. I mean, there are having laws. Sorry, I live in New York, so this. Speaking of crime problems, there's something going on right there. But speaking of having laws or having restrictions on, home burglaries don't stop home invasions, right? I mean, they're obviously going to happen. That doesn't mean you shouldn't have laws against it, or you shouldn't have restrictions on it. And I think that what I'm trying to do is just say there are probably some things that we can do that, yeah, you're not going to stop all of them. You're not going to stop the next Vegas, God forbid, wherever that is. But if we can stop one, and that's the problem with kind of trying to prove a negative, it's like, if you stopped one, you don't know. I mean, you don't have proof of saying, well, we've stopped, and by enacting this, we've stopped 15 different guys who would have shot me, because they obviously didn't do it. So you didn't know that, you actually even stopped it. So it's very hard to kind of prove that negative. But simply sitting back, either after Newtown or Orlando or Vegas, and saying, well, it's just the law. We got to have access to guns, and it's just the kind of world that we have to live in. And while I agree that violent crime in major cities is sometimes relatively consistent, what we're looking at here is not necessarily trying to prevent the day-to-day crime, small guns fire, the thing that you kind of illustrated in the urban areas, but it's this steady increase of mass shootings that has really just grown exponentially over the last 10 to 15 years, where you have single shooters that are getting more and more proficient at taking out large groups of people because they have access, unfettered, basically access, legal access that they're, it's not like the guy in Vegas stole all these weapons, he bought them, legal access to these weapons of basically mass destruction. And so you've got to, I think, begin the discussion of it's fine to have laws that enable freedom and allow freedom as long as a society is able to exercise those freedoms, I think, responsibly. But the Constitution is a living document, and throughout its history, the court has kind of restricted it and expanded it based on the way society is going and the needs of society and the ability of that society to exercise freedom. Where I even point to in the article, the idea of the abortion argument, the Fourth Amendment, is that, you know, the court has expanded a freedom of privacy to a woman that allows her to terminate a pregnancy. And there's no Christian that I know of, you know, no kind of conservative Christian, evangelical Christian, that's not going to push back on that and say, you know, obviously society is in such a place that allowing people to have that level of freedom is detrimental to society because it's taking away life. So let's, you know, we're going to definitely argue that we restrict that. And so I'm trying to draw a line between the idea of arguing for a little, maybe the restriction on freedom, or at least an evaluation of the rights that we enjoy, is necessary because the society is increasingly proven that it's not, I don't know if it can be trusted with the unfettered freedom that they've got. So,
okay, let's kind of wrap this on legislation or policy or something like that. Okay. And so I do, like I said, I obviously, I kind of go back to, you know, like the AR-15 or, you know, tactical rifles. You know, I obviously don't care that much, or I would have made it a priority to buy one at this point.
Right.
So, you know, I kind of go back to, what am I like? You only really believe one thing, and it's the thing you do. So I obviously, like, that's not my top priority. I do carry a lot. I mean, not all the time. But I mean, I sure carry every time I go to a movie theater, because that is, you know, a place where some pretty terrible things have happened. And unfortunately, although I live in a very kind of cool neighborhood in Kenosha, Wisconsin, kind of halfway between Chicago and Milwaukee, there were several instances of attempted kidnappings, and Kenosha apparently became like a sex trafficking kind of thoroughway between Chicago and Milwaukee. And there were several women that were tried to be thrown into a van. They got one of them, 18-year-old girl. They cut her throat, burned her body, apparently because she struggled too much. I grew up around people who killed people. You know, my grandfather and great uncles, you know, all went to World War II. I think at the Battle of the Bulge, if I can kind of piece together the half stories my great uncle told me, about you know, about the Battle of the Bulge, that he may have crawled over a Nazi and stabbed him to death in the dark. I don't know if he ever slept more than 4 hours at a time for the rest of his life. That's not ever a situation I ever want to be in. But if it comes down to me taking action, or a 14-year-old girl getting thrown into a van a block away on the beach, I know what decision I have to take, even if it haunts me for the rest of my life. Right. So, I mean, are you okay with that? Do you think I'm a bad Christian? Like you said that you're okay with, you know, with self-defense. So, you know, I would probably go back to early Catholic writings as far as where I line up with, right. Kind of later Roman Empire stuff. If we can get a little nerdy there, but like, I mean, so where do you land on that?
I would land probably on a little bit more, I guess, of an early Roman Empire interpretation. Probably a little bit more pacifist. I think there's a definite distinction to be drawn between violence in wartime and other. I mean, I think it's a peculiar and particular case, whether it's World War II or whenever, of what a soldier has to do in wartime. What I am trying to hope for and pray for and avoid is that that level of violence doesn't descend into our everyday experience. And Martin Luther King says the ultimate weakness of violence is that it begets more violence, robbing an already dark night of its stars, that there's the descending spiral of just, okay, this guy's going to bring a knife. I'm going to bring a gun. He's going to send my guy to the hospital. I'm going to send his guy to the morgue. That kind of ultimate descending spiral that I think I'm trying to push back on and avoid, because ultimately, as a Christian, while I believe in self-defense and I believe in just war theory, and I believe in the right of us to kind of protect the life of my family and myself. Life is important. I'm pro-life. I don't want to wrap myself in the trappings of the that would somehow indicate that I put more hope in and find more comfort in what the world provides for protection than the protection I already have in Christ. And so, not anti-gun, own a gun, carry a gun. That's fine. But I think that it's I'm not just talking about the guy that owns one gun and carries it. I'm talking about the guy that owns 100 guns and is having, is just takes such kind of comfort in this tool of killing that is that I kind of push back on and find problematic. So I think what I'm trying to avoid, and like I said, trying to pray against and hope that this doesn't happen, is that general society doesn't turn into the warfare experience of your, great uncle, where we're crawling over each other in a movie theater, trying to either save life or take life.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and actually we are trending away from that. I mean, the mass shootings thing is certainly something that's a disturbing thing that's worth talking about. 1992 to now, violent crime has about halved. And, the stat that I think is pretty telling is when Florida got concealed carry, they only offered it for in-state residents. So violent crime against tourists went way up. And then when Florida offered it, offered like reciprocity, crime went down overall. And I certainly on the culture thing, I would say I own, basically 2 guns for self-defense that I kind of interchange on carrying. I own a couple guns for hunting. 3. I own one kind of just gun for like shooting cans. And then I do own a few that are family heirlooms, like, 1890 to 1950 that don't really serve a function other than, I grew up shooting them or whatever. Right. I will say that going like things that used to be like gun and outdoor shows, they used to be very like hunter focused, and now they do seem to be focused a lot on guys who like want to play military. And I will say 100% that is a culture that is super weird to me. I don't feel comfortable with it. I'm not okay with it. Like there's a difference in like, needing a good tool for self-defense and just like trying to be Rambo. And that does get weird. And, even people within the, that are probably more like me, more like hunter focused, have said like, okay, we're getting kind of weird and aggressive here. So I do think there's an aspect of American culture that totally is that.
Well, just as a quick illustration, I was visiting in-laws in Springfield, Missouri, right? And so we go out to dinner at this Mexican restaurant there, and it's Springfield is a pretty quiet town. It's got its maybe rough areas, just like any mid-sized city, but it's not inner city Chicago, right? And we're at this Mexican restaurant full of families, kids, just everywhere. And we're sitting next to this table, and there are maybe 6 guys there, and they all, with their family, they're all packing, like on their, they all have guns on, just fully displayed, on their sides. They're not cops. They're not police weapons. They're just different revolvers and different kinds of guns. And so they're all sitting at their table. They're all carrying. They're all displaying, what they're carrying. I mean, that's open carry. And I kind of sat there and I thought, okay, there's nothing about this environment, or this little particular tiny Mexican restaurant that should speak to any sort of danger. Nothing about this part of town speaks to any of this sort of danger. And there are kids running around, and here's a whole table with, probably 6 guns kind of keep, grinning for bear. And it's like, I want to know and just kind of ask them, like, what are you afraid of? Like what kind of fear is driving you to, you can't even go out to dinner in Springfield? Hey, if you're in Afghanistan, okay, you know, whatever. If you're in a, you know, rough part of maybe the border states or something where you're far away from law enforcement and you're, you know, eating a Mexican restaurant or whatever, and there's a lot of drug traffic, that's another thing. But I mean, you're just in the middle of suburbia, man, and you are, you know, if someone sneezes, you know, or comes in with a toy gun, you're gonna blow off. It's sort of a posture that I think is more out of kind of fear than protection, and more out of driven out of maybe even an irrational fear than some sort of just exercising of rights. And that's kind of what I see as maybe a societal issue that kind of speaks to that playing military kind of culture.
Yeah, well, and I actually don't support open carry. I don't think. Well, and this is like the mega bill that I would see put through. Okay, I would like to see one piece of gun control legislation put through, and then we put the issue to bed. Because without a doubt, Dianne Feinstein, Chuck Schumer, Barbara Boxer, Bill de Blasio, every rich Yahoo in Hollywood, that's what they want. They want door-to-door police, total gun ban. I mean, they say it. Like, they say it. Sure. And there was like, nobody wants to take your guns. And I'm like, I just named 5 major people in power that want to take all guns, right? I don't see, so like assault and battery are actually separate charges. Yeah. So if I take a swing at your face, that's assault. If I connect, that's battery, right? I see open carry as too close to like assault, basically. Like, there's no reason I can carry 3 magazines and a single stack 9mm handgun under a t-shirt and nobody needs to know. And I don't put any stickers on my car. I don't wear any gun apparel or hats or anything like that, because it should be a private, discreet thing, right? And if nothing else, if there's ever a mass shooting, the shooter's going to open up the back of your head first, because like you are the perceived threat, right? Like, if they're going to shoot up a Chipotle, the guy in the AR-15 t-shirt is going to get one of the chests before he can do anything.
Right. The one hole in your argument, though, is that for those that are, in favor of open carry, their whole thing is that if it is private and it's not seen, it's not a deterrent. That's why they are carrying these around. They kind of want to say. Oh,
no. Well, but that goes against the data that concealed carry in general pushed the violent crime. That goes against the Florida study, right? I would say if I could get a compromise, the things I would want to be able to carry in any state. Because I can carry just about dang near anywhere except Illinois, which is 3 miles away. And Illinois says I'm, not a danger in my own vehicle, but I'm a danger out of my vehicle. Right. But they licensed me for a concealed carry permit before I moved up here.
Yeah.
So I would say I would want that. And I mean, that's honestly the biggest one. And then just basically no new legislation. And if we wanted to go to bump stock and no registration of just normal person, like they keep track of everything I own and profile me. Okay. Right. If I'm not displaying any other violent acts, like sending money to the Philippines, to ISIS. Right. For that, if I could carry in every state, I would easily limit all magazine sizes to 15 rounds, ban bump stocks, ban 50 caliber rifles that can take down an airplane. And then that would be it. That would be done. My feeling is if, we ban, semi-auto rifles, as soon as somebody shoots up something with a bag full of revolvers that they keep shooting and dropping, and actually, I don't think that's going to happen, because honestly, I don't think any legislation is going to go much of anywhere. I think really the fate of this issue in the United States depends on who dies during what administration on the Supreme Court.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no, I think that's wise. What I would kind of maybe draw a kind of conclusion to is kind of a theological point. Really, what I hope to kind of tease some of the article and some stuff was probably taken out of the article that it ended up not addressing, but it's that the ultimate call on any Christian is to proclaim the kingdom of which they are a part, which is ultimately, God's kingdom and the kingdom of heaven. To be an evangelist, to proclaim God's word, that's the ultimate call on our lives, even above our own physical security, right? Or even political preference. And it's not as if if the whole beginning of Christianity is filled with stories of people who, against their own self-interest and self-security, still continued to proclaim the message of the gospel, and were a community that was welcoming, even if it was politically detrimental to them to be welcoming. And what I want to push against on anything, whether it's politics, whether it's guns, whether it's any of those things, is anything basically that can basically supersede or get in the way of our ultimate mission here, which is the proclamation of the gospel and the spread of the gospel and the expansion of the kingdom of God. And so if it is, if carrying guns on my hip and wrapping myself in gun culture is inhibiting me from ultimately, even though it's making me feel safe and it's, I'm able to protect myself, if it's somehow hindering my ability to reach out to people or welcome people into my midst and be a welcoming presence, a loving presence here on the earth, I would want to kind of push back on that. Same with the politics. If my politics, if my allegiance to any political party or any political candidate is limiting my ability to proclaim the gospel and see that kingdom of God kind of spread, I think that that's wrong. And ultimately, my ultimate allegiance needs to be to God's kingdom, and my ultimate message needs to be about His gospel. And what I'm seeing subtly within our community and within evangelicalism is this tendency of different things to kind of supersede what is ultimate, right? It's like, yeah, I believe the gospel. Yeah, I believe in evangelism. Yes, I believe in the kingdom of God. But I mean, my gun is really what is most important. Or, yeah, I believe in evangelism. I believe in the kingdom of God and the gospel. But, people are saying happy holidays instead of Merry Christmas. I need a politician who's going to rectify that, even if it's a philandering adulterer, right? And trying to keep the ultimate things ultimate and trying to keep our loves rightly ordered is kind of what I'm pushing towards and what I'm arguing for.
Yeah, no, I think that's, I'm pretty much right there. And on the Trump's, cheating on his first wife with his second wife, cheating on his second wife with his third wife, God knows what's in between there. I've never asked for forgiveness. I don't know the guy's heart. I don't know the guy. I've never met him. If you put that in a book and said, is this person a Christian? Forgiveness is the cornerstone of asking for forgiveness, the cornerstone of the Christian belief system. So I would say, no, I don't think that guy, I don't think somebody in that situation is probably a Christian. And I find that to be, pretty, I think you really have to bend a lot of stuff to convince yourself of that. And although, Johnny Moore, who I've met, has raised $26 million for refugees, and has done way more for the world than I have. He goes in there and praises the president on Twitter or whatever. And, all I can say is Johnny Moore is a way better Christian than I am, or at least he gets a lot more done. Even though I never wanted Trump, I think that Trump is nothing personal, but a big government New York liberal that has more in common with FDR than any other past president. I'm going to stop just short of, condemning everybody that's ever, believed in him as an evangelical, just like I'm going to stop short of the kind of modern Christian left where the gospel is getting Bernie Sanders' healthcare plan through.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I think that a couple things. I think that it is all we have to base any judgment on anybody's life is the fruit, right? If they claim to be a Christian, kind of what's the fruit of their life? Do they manifest the gifts of the fruits of the Spirit, the kindness and love and peace and those kinds of things? And if you don't see that, I think there's reason to question. If he's not a believer, then I'm not going to expect him to comport himself like one or act like one. If he is a believer, then I have a responsibility as a fellow believer to call him to account and to, just like Paul does with Peter in Galatians, say, yeah, man, you're out of step with the gospel. when you say these things. So there's even a higher responsibility on the part of the Christians, if he in fact claims to be a Christian, to speak truth to that power and to go to him as a brother, regardless of whether or not he's the president, and say, you know, brother, you are out of step with the gospel. And so that's what I'm not seeing. And a lot of people who say, oh, he's obviously a Christian. I believe he's a Christian. I met with him. I prayed with him. He's a believer. And yet he does and says things that in any church, any pastor, or even just any fellow believer would probably go up to them and say, you know, brother, I don't know if that was really in step with the gospel. And that is nowhere to be found. Right? I mean, it's just dead silence, like crickets. And so that's what I would kind of push back there. And I would say, to your comparison with Johnny Moore, like, Johnny Moore, great guy. He has done a lot of good. Franklin Graham has done a lot of good. A lot of these men have done a lot of good. But our ultimate standing with God and how good a Christian we are is not based on the number of wins we have in the win column of things that we've kind of done here on earth. It's ultimately based in Christ and what he's done for us on the cross. And so you in Christ are just as loved and just as beautiful to God as Johnny Moore, regardless of what Johnny Moore has done, right or wrong, and vice versa. So I would ask Johnny, I would ask Franklin, I would ask any of these guys that have an ear, you know, to the president, is when he behaves in a way that is this contra-Christian and anti-evangelical and anti-gospel, is to go to him as a brother and say, man, you got to stop that. That's not how a Christian acts. If you are a baby Christian, as James Dobson claims that he is, then he needs to be discipled. And I'm having a hard time seeing either people from a distance or even stories of people up close that are going to him and discipling him and kind of calling him to account.
Okay. Just to, you know, we got to wrap this thing because, you know, we're an hour in or whatever, and that's probably about the attention span of most people. Right. You know, I would say that if there's a closing line in all this is all very interesting. I mean, you know, I carry a lot of days. I actually don't talk about it a lot. Right. I don't know that this is a key issue that I'm championing right now. You know, if I can quote myself from last week from an article I wrote, you know, on the NFL protest thing, right. You know, if you are, you know, if you really want to show your patriotism, there's a lot of very lonely vets in nursing homes. Yeah. If you really want to show your Black Lives Matter-ism, there's a lot of kids that could use a mentor. Yeah. Or you could just shut up if you're not going to do anything. I mean, that's also a valid course to take. Admit to yourself you're not going to do anything, and just, you know, stop talking. You know, so as far as all this goes, I don't think I have any, you know, any. I have even as somebody who's, you know, who's now has a syndicated network radio show and gets to review films and write about them. I mean, I maybe have I have the power maybe to move the needle on a movie that much with the evangelical crowd, or to point somebody towards a band like that much with the evangelical crowd. I really don't matter in the scheme of things, right? And so really all that really matters is like what I'm actually doing, you know, normally within 5 miles of my house. Right. You know, and for us all to think that we, you know, and there, I mean, you know, symbolic things do matter. I still believe in somebody protecting my rights from Chuck Schumer. So I'm going to move over to the, you know, National Gun Association probably, which I would say has a more true conservative stance where they're not pushing for federalism versus what the NRA wants. It's just kind of national power. They're pushing for the balance of power in state. But I mean, that's where I would come down on is I do think this issue is worth talking about, but it's not the place I'm putting, you know, a ton of my energy or anything. I sure put my energy into other things.
Sure. Yeah. I'm the same way. And I think what you're doing with the show, what I'm doing in this column is you take whatever influence you've got, whatever platform you've got, and you're trying to spur a conversation. And I think there needs to be people within the evangelical community that are willing to kind of question the sacred cows that this community has, right? I mean, just the things that have almost, I think, become idolized, whether it's political preference or political affiliation or behavioral things within the culture that in order to be Christian, evangelical, and conservative and Republican, you've got to do these things, and if they're just sacrosanct, is to where those things don't align with our ultimate mission, and proclaiming the kingdom of God and the gospel here on earth, we need to challenge those, and we need to be willing. Somebody needs to at least raise the question and risk the ire of people who kind of disagree and who view those things as sacred, and kind of push back and say, well, I think we need to talk about this, because it's not just affecting our lives and the way that we act in our day-to-day within 5 miles of our house. It's affecting our witness nationally and globally of who we are as Christians. Do we belong to Christ, or do we belong to Caesar? And I think we need to make sure that there are clear lines that point directly to who we belong to.
Do you want to point the audience to, I mean, are you just kind of writing randomly for magazines, or do you sort of have a home for your thoughts online? Or
I mean, I mainly publish for Relevant, or they post a lot of my stuff. I've posted some stuff for the ERLC before, and it's Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission, and a couple other websites. But yeah, mainly it's just Relevant.
Okay. Well, they can look for you there, relevantmagazine.com. Drew Griffin, thanks a lot, man.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.